For months, Andrew Tate has been in prison in Romania. Along with his brother Tristan and two Romanian women, the controversial influencer is being investigated over claims of human trafficking, rape and forming a criminal gang to sexually exploit women. They all deny all the allegations. Court papers say the Tate brothers are now under house arrest for 30 days. As they left prison, they pushed through crowds to a car with darkened windows and were driven off. Their supporters chanted as they left. On this Sky News Daily, Neil looks at why Andrew Tate still has so many loyal supporters.
I first encountered the influencer Andrew Tate many months ago when his brand of hyper-masculine misogyny began appearing somewhat inexplicably on my social media.
If you put a whole bunch of men and a whole bunch of women, you strand them on a desert island, the men would start having to build things and fight off the animals, and the women would start farming and whatever the women would do.
He's made his name preaching his view of 21st century masculinity. His target audience, those still trying to work that out for themselves. If, as some say, the measure of a man is the legacy he leaves, well, Andrew Tate has already left his mark, some would say stain, on society.
But I said that if a woman is going out with a man, she belongs to that man. That's his woman. So she wants to do OnlyFans. She owes him some money because she's his.
And that's one of the milder comments he's made. Much of his content is simply too offensive to share, including discussion of hitting and choking women, and his suggestion that sexual assault survivors share responsibility for their attacks. Billions of views later, he remains utterly unrepentant, or perhaps simply indifferent to the abundant criticism.
I want all the people who hate me and go, he's a misogynist, to sit there broke. And I want all the people who go, Tate's a G, to be flexing.
Despite making his fortune through a variety of online activities, Tate now finds himself permanently banned from Facebook, Instagram, YouTube and TikTok. But his content continues to circulate, and so too his reach. The problem with that is obvious, that whilst once we said it took a village to raise a child, nowadays anyone with the internet can directly access and influence our kids. So, who is Andrew Tate? And how did he emerge from the darkest corners of the web to worldwide infamy? I'm Niall Paterson, and this is the Sky News Daily. Later, I'll be speaking to an online hate expert who'll explain the remarkably tech-savvy strategy that resulted in Tate's rise from obscurity to ubiquity, and explore the effects of his online misogyny with a writer who's researched male sexual entitlement. But first...
He's a British-American kickboxer, the son of an international chess master.
Journalist Shanti Das, who's been digging into Andrew Tate's background for The Observer.
He was raised on an estate in Luton. He sort of first came to be known in public because of his kickboxing career, but then he went on Big Brother in 2016. And from then, there was a couple of years where he was sort of making headlines for saying very controversial things, basically. He was kicked off Big Brother in 2016 over a video that surfaced in which he allegedly attacked a woman. He claimed it wasn't abuse and it was consensual. And then over the next couple of years, there were various controversies. So in the wake of the Harvey Weinstein scandal, he said women should take personal responsibility for being raped. And then later he tweeted that depression isn't real.
Certainly he seems to portray himself as a man of means. There's lots of evidence on social media of, well, at least there is some evidence of exceptional riches.
Yeah, he's built up a personality, a profile online in which he sort of appears to portray a very glamorous lifestyle, so posing with very fancy cars at his mansion in Romania where he lives and posing with wads of cash and lots of women, very glamorous sort of outward-looking lifestyle.
I mean, certainly Andrew Tate himself has suggested that part of the reason that he has moved to Romania is the culture there, but also the legal system.
So he has said that, one of the reasons why he moved there is basically it's harder to be held to account for sexual abuse allegations. And he said that was 40% of the reason that he moved there. And he's also just talked about how he just thinks it's a freer society. He talked in the UK about how he was being investigated by UK police for several months.
There was also, I believe this business is still ongoing, something known as the Hustlers University.
Over the last few months in particular, he has attracted more than 120,000 fans to Husser's University, and this is like an online academy where it's offering customers, particularly young men and boys, an opportunity to make money. So people signing up were told that there would be the opportunity they could earn sort of thousands of pounds a month, and there were various strands and different types of lessons that they'd be taught how to do that. So things like crypto investing, drop shipping, and then a really big one was an affiliate marketing scheme, which meant that the more people the more sort of other members they referred, and the more people they got signed up, they would get a commission.
That sounds, I don't know how best to put this, kind of almost like a triangular structure, maybe a bit pyramidal.
Yeah, so he's denied claims that it's a pyramid scheme, but he was basically, yes, it relies very much on people sharing content and getting other people to sign up.
Give us a few examples of the kind of stuff that Andrew Tate has been putting up. I mean, I'll confess, he came across my radar, a good few months ago, just started popping up on lots of social feeds. And I couldn't quite believe what I was hearing.
A lot of people over the last few months have found that when they're scrolling through social media feeds, and particularly TikTok, as I say, they were getting promoted lots and lots of Andrew Tate content. And the types of views that he's expressing ranged from things like saying women belong in the home, shouldn't go out without their boyfriends, shouldn't go on girls' holidays, or a man's property, can't drive, to sort of more extreme things. So there's a video where he describes throwing a woman's things out of a window. There's other ones where he talks about hypothetically what he'd do if he caught a woman, if a woman sort of accused him of cheating, and he says it's bang out the machete, boom in her face, and grab her by the neck. And he often uses like derogatory terms towards women, things like John Ho, and calling them other really offensive words.
As father to a boy aged 6, going on 16, I'll admit to a personal interest in this story. After all, it is difficult enough being a dad these days, trying to provide an example of what it means to be a good man without those online subverting your best efforts.
This whole idea of being toxically masculine is complete garbage, and the reason it's garbage is because it's a first world problem.
Indeed, Tate would be entirely easy to dismiss if he was merely strong as an oak, thick as 2 short planks. But it's his intelligence and guile that brought him the fame and the infamy.
Well, Andrew Tate realised what many other people who want to make themselves internet famous to try and build some money off the back of it have realised, which is that controversy sells on those platforms because of the way they're constructed.
Imran Ahmed is chief executive of the Centre for Countering Digital Hate.
The fundamental way to succeed on social media is to produce controversial content that gets people really angry. And he has produced that in spades.
So explain then, Imran, why does such controversial content do so well? I mean, it's a reflection of us. It's a reflection of the consumer, isn't it?
Well, yes and no. To an extent, it's, of course, a reflection of billions and billions of clicks that people have, how long your eyeballs rest on a video. And these are very sophisticated platforms that even look at how long do you stay watching a video before you move on? Okay, give them more of that. But it's in part, he says himself, you need to have lots of haters who are following you too. So he produces content that creates reactions, engagement, but doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. Platforms don't care. They just want to keep us on the platform. So in fact, feeding us stuff that we actually think is morally repulsive can be as effective as feeding us stuff which is interesting or factual or actually makes us feel better about the day.
It all feels like, another kind of, for want of a better phrase, decentralized revenue stream for Andrew Tate. Even if he's not producing this content, he's still benefiting from it. I mean, let's talk about the efforts to try and remove Andrew Tate from the mainstream platforms. I mean, freezing his accounts in and of themselves isn't going to do it.
It won't be sufficient on its own. And what we're going to have to do, in fact, is get to grips with social media companies that say that they're taking action, but actually fail to do so with a simple change of name of account or a tactic like Andrew Tate's using, where he's encouraging other people to post his content and direct them back to his business. And I think that, the social media companies have been a little bit cute about it all. They always say, 2 years after the event, they say, oh, we've taken action against the main account. But they know just as well as I do that this is a standard play tactic by bad actors online.
So do you see then, Imran, the platforms themselves as complicit in this misogyny?
Well, yes, and let me explain to you how. So let's take, for example, YouTube. So YouTube, we did a small study where we looked at the videos of Andrew Tate on YouTube. We calculated that for the 3 most prominent accounts sharing Andrew Tate, that YouTube was generating £3.4 million in revenue. Now, that doesn't sound like a ton of money, but let's not forget these businesses are based off, hundreds, millions of accounts, which is how you build up $1 billion revenue company, is from these components of 3.4 million. And they've been very reluctant in the past, and still are very reluctant with Andrew Tate, to take any action against accounts sharing his content, because in the end, it's revenues, isn't it?
You've talked quite a bit, Imran, about the intelligence that he's clearly demonstrated, the skills that he has demonstrated, the way in which he has gamed algorithms and all the rest of it. Given that he is clearly not daft, he is clearly a smart man. I just wonder sometimes whether this is all a bit performative, all a bit of an act.
Well, I don't know if he believes it or not. I can't tell what's in the hearts of people, but what I can tell you is the effect of the content that he pushes out into society, which is that he keeps telling young men that the way to be a real man is to hurt women and to dominate them, to subjugate them, to make them less than you. And the net effect of billions of people seeing that content, of millions of British young men seeing that content, is that over time, it will normalize those ideas. There's something called frequency bias in our psychology. If we see something more frequently, we think it's normal and acceptable. And the net effect is actually to put women at risk in the UK and also radicalize our young men. And that is surely unacceptable.
But these young men, just to stick with this point, these young men, they have their own agency. These men are capable of making their own decisions. These men are capable of switching off their PC, their Mac, their iPhone, whatever. And there are other male role models out there. I mean, we can blame Andrew Tate for disseminating this information, but, there are plenty of young, smart men out there who are sitting down and ingesting it, consuming it by the bucket load, who, frankly, should know better.
The problem with a platform like TikTok is that it doesn't give you agency over what you consume. You are really being driven by the algorithm. Let me give you an example. We set up a fake account for a 16-year-old boy on TikTok. Now, this is a platform that Andrew Tate's really dominated. Within 2 minutes, the platform was recommending to this clean, brand new account Andrew Tate videos. And once we actually liked one of those videos, our For You, so the recommended videos feed, was flooded with misogynistic, homophobic, and racist content. The problem is that there are platforms that seek to push this into as many feeds as possible. There's not actually a supply-demand relationship in the way there would be with, say, a newspaper, where you get to choose what you pick. These are algorithmically driven. They're mathematically driven platforms that decide for you, to a great extent, what you see and what you consume.
Whilst this content lingers on the web, the more will see it and potentially be influenced by it.
Even though he's been banned on TikTok for some time, he's got various fan accounts on TikTok that have still got hundreds of thousands of followers. So even though he's essentially been deplatformed, his content lives on, that legacy still lives on.
Rachel Thompson is a journalist specialising in sex and relationships and has long had Tate on her radar.
But what I was seeing on those forums is essentially that men think that the balance has sort of swung too far the other way, that we are essentially living now in a feminist society where women have more privilege than men, and that men are suffering at the hands of feminism, which they deem a dangerous ideology. I see some people sort of taking offense at being called, like a white straight male, and to sort of, to have that uncomfortable conversation with oneself, to examine one's own privilege. I think that, this alternative viewpoint, it can be quite attractive, I think.
Given the fact that I do not know, I can hand on heart not name a single man of my acquaintance who looks at Andrew Tate and sees, an image of masculinity that any of us would ever want to copy or to aspire to. Is perhaps part of the problem one actually identified by people like Tate and his ilk, that, you know, there are perhaps a lack of male role models around at the moment, that there is something of a crisis in masculinity, in terms of suicide, in terms of mental health generally, in terms of the widening education gap between boys and girls? I mean, is that perhaps part of this, that they are looking for someone to look up to? They go online when mum, whoever else is around, isn't there, and they come across someone who looks successful, looks like he's having a good time, looks in essence, you know, in a number of ways like what they would like to be.
Look, I mean, I think that certainly it could be the case. I think that there's a number of things going on. Like, there is absolutely a crisis happening within masculinity. But I think that what's lacking is education around that. I think that, you know, we already have a crisis within sex education, for instance, but I think we also could really do with, and I actually think this forms part of sex education actually, but examining the impact of gender roles, and that's something that can be really valuable. You know, if people who are teachers, people who are responsible in terms of, you know, they are educated, right, in this topic, and they are not going to spread misinformation when it comes to masculinity, and they can have a nuanced conversation with young men, then, you know, to examine those gender roles, to examine the impact that the patriarchy, that toxic masculinity has on young men and, you know, on boys and adult men, that those can be really valuable conversations, and can have a long-lasting impact on not just boys and men's lives, but also on everyone's lives.
Andrew Tate certainly won't be the last, but he also certainly wasn't the first. I mean, you think of other people who occupied kind of similar spaces online. You know, Hunter Moore, the most hated man on the internet. Yeah, people may have seen that documentary, that website, that poorly named revenge porn website that he set up. So, absent the type of conversations that you were just talking about between peers and young men, take us through the real world consequences of the level of this level of misogyny being spread to such an extent.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew Tate is absolutely part of a bigger problem of not just online misogyny, but also misogyny in wider society. And unfortunately, we are already seeing his impact, you know, a tangible impact in children. And I saw a thread over the weekend about a childminder who was looking after a little boy age 10 and his little sister age 7. And the little boy had been essentially indoctrinated already by the ideas that Andrew Tate is spreading. Basically said that he believed that men were stronger than girls, and his behavior was having an impact on the girls in his school, and his little sister who called him a bully. He was bullying the girls at school, and it's just really alarming to hear about that sort of stuff happening, because, you know, that's a real example of these views which we see online, them sort of filtering out into the real world and having a dangerous impact on boys. And, you know, also I saw it's a now deleted Reddit post from a female high school teacher whose students of high school age were citing Andrew Tate, refusing to do their homework, and stating that women should only be housewives. And so, you know, this is obviously, you know, it's filtering out into the real world amongst children, amongst teenagers. But in a broader context, we know from academic research that misogyny is the root cause of sexual violence, and that, you know, the consequences, like, we're literally talking about life and death here. We're talking about sexual violence, which is, you know, something that affects a huge proportion of women and marginalized genders and girls. And, you know, this is where this comes from. It's not harmless. It's not some sort of comedy routine that, I mean, unfortunately, it does come up when it comes up on your For You page on TikTok, and people respond to it. And there's often, you see, like, it's done in a funny kind of comical way, like the responses to it. And I'm like, but this is really serious, actually. It's really dangerous.
Let's bring Imran back in at this point. I mean, Imran, when you have content remaining up on all of these platforms, despite the fact that the creator has been banned, I mean, are we in a situation now where this is just irreparable, that there's nothing can be done?
You see, part of the reason that we haven't been able to fix it to date is because we don't have the tools. We don't have the levers to pull to change things. So what you do there is, when you've got these big problems being created by an otherwise productive industry, you create regulation. You shift the costs of dealing with those harms from society back to the company. We did it, for example, with tobacco, with climate change. We've done it with a whole range of industries. And that's why we need an online safety bill. So the UK's designed a bill which is actually going through Parliament, but has been stalled because of this leadership election that's been going on in the Conservative Party, which would start to shift some of those costs back. It says if you create considerable harm, you know you're creating that harm, your terms and conditions say that you won't create those harms, we might actually fine you if you don't deal with them in the way that you claim you will.
If manners maketh man, well, Andrew Tate might want to take a long, hard look in the mirror. But to dismiss his output as infantile, as the puerile ramblings of an embittered alpha, would be to ignore just how popular he is. There remain thousands, perhaps millions of young men hungry for this type of content. And if Tate truly did make millions from his misogyny, it can't be long before others follow in his footsteps. Andrew Tate did not respond to Sky News' request for comment, but speaking online on Twitch on Friday, he said this: "A lot of things that have been taken and chopped up and thrown online are things from a very long time ago, when I didn't have a fraction of the influence I have now. I'm not apologising for them, I'm not even saying they are intrinsically wrong." Tate continued, "I've made countless videos about how women need to be protected, how women need to be respected, how important the women are in my life, how much I respect my mother. I've done loads of things positive about women." We've also been hearing from YouTube. In a statement to Bloomberg, it said that channels associated with Andrew Tate had been removed because of multiple violations of its community guidelines and terms of service, including its hate speech policy. If a channel is terminated, the uploader is unable to use, own or create any other YouTube channels. Meanwhile, TikTok said in a statement, "Misogyny is a hateful ideology that is not tolerated on TikTok." My thanks to Shanti Das, Imran Ahmed, Rachel Thompson, and of course to you for listening to the Sky News Daily, hosted by me, Niall Paterson. This edition was produced and mixed by Emma Ray Woodhouse. The Daily's editor is Philly Beaumont.